Okay, thank you, Nick. Welcome, everybody. Wow, we're filling up. Everyone's getting smaller. Everyone's screen is getting smaller. Calling the meeting of the Santa Margarita Groundwater Agency, May 28th to order. Are there any, can we get a roll call? Nick?
Absolutely can. Just give me one moment. All right, Director Engfer. Director Engfer, are you present, sir?
I saw him before.
He's there. He's attempting to speak. The microphone is green, but we can't hear him at the moment. So maybe we'll go ahead and then circle back to him.
Gotcha. Director Leopold. Director McPherson. Director Cassidy.
I am here.
Director Franklin.
Here.
Director Pollock.
Here.
Director Dillis.
Here.
Director Ferris.
Here.
Director Henry.
Here.
Director Stiles.
Here.
Director Perry.
Here.
All right, looping back, Director Engfer, are you with us, sir? All right, we'll go through the alternates real quick and circle back again. All right, Director Baskin. Director Brown. Director Koopman. Director Hayes. Director Lind. Ms. Sauerrenner, I think that she's maybe getting ready here. Director Moran.
Present.
Director Eckwall.
Present.
All righty. And Director Koopman, are you back with us, sir? Well, if you are, I don't have you, unfortunately. I see you there. I'm going to mark that as possible. Director Engfer.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir, I can. Welcome. All right. We have two absent, Mr. Perry there, and we do have a quorum.
Thank you, Nick. Do we have any additions or deletions to the agenda, staff?
And no additions or deletions at this moment. Just wanted to make sure that everybody's aware that there was amended agenda sent out earlier today. It's a very minor change to the agenda, just language, clarifying language, but nothing new was added. So for those people who might have accessed the agenda packet earlier, I encourage you to go to the website. The most current version is up there. And the same is with presentation.
Okay, thank you. I've got that. And are there anyone who is watching from the public? This is the time for oral communications for anything that is not on our agenda tonight. If you have anything to say, you're going to have a little time to say it. So Nick, I'll let you wrangle this.
All right, understood. First and foremost, let's just go ahead and start with the folks who are not calling in. If anybody's coming in via computer, if you want to indicate that you have a public comment to share, please speak up now. All right, hearing nothing at this point in time. If anybody is calling in via phone, you should be unmuted at this point. Please feel free to speak up. All right, at this time, I am not hearing any indications that anyone wants to make a public comment.
Okay, great. So thank you. Now we have approval of the minutes of the April 23rd meeting. Do I have a motion?
I'll move acceptance of the minutes.
Commissioner Ingfer seconds, or Director Ingfer seconds.
Okay, was that Doug who seconded? It was Jack that made the motion.
Yeah, Ingfer seconded.
Okay. Is there any discussion first from the board on anything on the agenda? Just to double check. Hearing none, is there anything from the public on something that they read in the packet on the agenda? This is the last month's agenda, minutes, I should say.
At this time, I'm hearing nobody.
Okay, then we will vote. Can I get a roll call vote, please, Nick?
Yes, sir, you can. Director Engfer.
I'm going to hope you can hear me now. Aye.
All right. Director McPherson, are you with us, sir? I saw him come, but I'm not sure if he's quite up yet. Director Cassidy.
Aye.
Director Franklin.
Aye.
Director Pollock.
Aye.
Director Dillis.
Yes.
Director Ferris.
Aye.
Director Henry.
Aye.
Director Stiles. Director Perry.
Aye.
There you are.
Aye.
All right, we have, let's see here. We have 9 ayes and 2 absent.
Okay, thank you, Nick. Okay, we'll move down to, we have no consent agenda tonight. Move to the general. We have our informational session on groundwater sustainability elements. 4.1.1, I don't think we're going to go into that tonight, although I did see some potential new versions of that look very user-friendly. And I look forward to that getting shared. I assume that's not tonight, right? Okay.
It's there mainly for the information, so everybody, public and the board members, have a better understanding where we are in the process, and hopefully this version is a little more straightforward and achieves the purpose.
Right, but we're not gonna go over it. If anyone has any questions or issues with it, please communicate with staff, and maybe we'll have a future time to put it on the agenda for tweaks. Okay, so I'm going to then hand this over to Dave Seppos first, and this will be 4.1.2, and then Georgina, in that order. Dave?
Good evening, everybody. Can you all hear me okay? I'm actually going to switch over to a headset just in case, but can folks hear me right now? Or can anybody not hear me? Okay, very good. All right, we are going to be going through another relatively intensive, to be quite frank, amount of technical information this evening, as will be fairly common for the next many meetings. Tonight's meeting will not be going as long as the last meeting. We obviously checked in with you, and we know that that was a bit of a marathon, and we recognize that. So we're continuing to be a little bit of a work in progress of striking a balance of the necessary conversation, doing the things that we can be doing to help you be as prepared as you can be as directors to be actively engaging in the conversation. In a minute, I'm going to hand it over to Georgina. I just want to kind of go through a couple of logistics for this presentation tonight. Georgina and I are going to be tag teaming a bit more than we did the last time. You will see as she starts going through her presentation that up on the upper right-hand corner on some slides, there's going to be a little P. And that's basically our little trigger event for you to know that that's where we're going to pause and have a conversation. And what that means is there's going to be some times where we're going to go slide by slide and have some pauses because we feel it's important to do so. And then conversely, there's going to be some times where there'll be a sequence of slides that Georgina in particular feels it's really important to be going through a whole number of slides, not a huge amount, but a number of slides to sort of set the stage for then the conversation. As we've done with the last couple of meetings, I'll be checking in with you all when we get to those pauses, seeing what kinds of comments and commentary you all have. Relatively early in this presentation, we are actually going to be looking to you all to be taking an action. That's been noted on your agenda. Chris knows that as well. Director Perry knows it as well, that we're going to then do a little bit of a pause and actually call the question.
All right, it looks like we may have some connection issues here. If I could just ask everybody to be patient.
Guys, can you hear me? Hello?
Got you back.
I have no idea what happened. All right. Well, I don't know where you lost me, but basically I was saying that we're going to be having a point in time relatively early in this presentation where there'll be a formal action we'll be asking the board to take. So just be aware of that. That's in the agenda and in the packet of information. So you should be able to be seeing the specific language of that. And I've spoken with Chris, and he knows when that's coming. So we actually call a formal roll call vote. Can everybody still hear me? Nick, can you guys hear me?
Yep, you're up loud and clear.
Okay, great. All right, with that, I'm going to hand it over to Georgina.
I'm sorry, I had to unmute myself. And Nick, are you moving me over?
All right, you should be up, Georgina.
Thank you. Okay. I'll put this on slideshow view. Okay. Well, hello everyone. I'm happy to be here again. And today, like Dave says, we're going to be talking about some serious stuff here. I'm getting feedback. Do you know why? Okay, let me try again. We're going to be focusing in on, do you hear the feedback or is it just me?
I got you. Just give me 1 second. It's Dave, that's coming from you. I'm going to put you on mute. All right, you should be fine.
Okay, great. That does sound better. I don't know how you figured that out, but you figured it out. And so we're in the meat of it. We're talking about minimum thresholds and measurable objectives, and we are talking about two different indicators. We're going to be looking at groundwater quality and groundwater levels. And if you were so inclined, I did give you some reading if you wanted to see how DWR has provided guidance on how to develop the different metrics, the sustainability management criteria. Oops, sorry, that's wrong. They have this document called this best management practices, and I've given you the link to that document plus the pages that are relevant to groundwater levels and groundwater quality. Sorry, I'm having trouble advancing here. So the outline, it's really just two big topics that we're going to be talking about today: groundwater levels and groundwater quality. And we're going to kick off with groundwater quality, degraded groundwater quality, minimum thresholds and measurable objectives. We're building on previous presentations that we have given, and and Dave mentioned that we will be having some board actions, and actually one is coming up pretty soon, and about the third slide here. Because we're going to be starting to talk about the draft statement of significant unreasonable. And this is the third time that you're seeing this statement. And I have here a version that is redlined, the red being new language we put in, and the strikeout being things that we're replacing. And if you remember that when we set up this, when we started talking about this indicator, I mentioned to you that it is an indicator that is a do no harm. As a GSA, you, in implementing the GSP, cannot cause degraded groundwater quality. We can't control everything that happens in the basin, a spill or you know, a leaking tank or something like that. We talked, Rosemary and I talked to you about having all these other policies in place, other departments, state departments that have that monitor and have the regulations to address that. The GSA is not taking on any of those responsibilities. The only responsibility it has is not to degrade the groundwater by implementing the GSP. So that's why the wording is the way it is, and that's why it says if a Santa Margarita Groundwater Agency project or management activities degrade the basin's groundwater quality such that it leads to this adverse impact. And we changed it to degrade water quality from cause an increase in concentrations. That was just too much words. So we took that out, and we also changed the non-compliance with drinking water standards, because the draft statement is supposed to be a very general statement. It's not giving too much detail, and that was too much detail, so we took that out. And so these changes happened because we had input from you at the last meeting, and we had email input from you, and also staff looked at it, and this is how we changed it. And to make it easier to read, the next slide here is without those changes. And I'm going to hand it over to Dave here to see if you have any comments, and maybe he will give you a few seconds to read through it in case you haven't read through it, just to make sure that this is something that that you don't have an objection to.
Okay, so you have seen this many times. This is what you're going to be taking an action on, and we'll be checking in with and handing it over to Chris in a minute. So are there comments or questions at this time about this statement of significance and unreasonableness? We'll be looking to you all first as board members. Then we'll, because this is an action, we'll be opening up the floor for any public comment for you to be hearing and considering, and then we'll come back to you and call a voice vote on a specific statement. So I'm opening the floor to folks.
Dave, there is a comment from Doug.
Yep, Doug, go ahead, please.
You thought you were going to get away with it, right?
No, I did not.
Generally supportive of the language changes. As I was reviewing this and thinking about it, I did want to put forth for discussion, if not consideration, some sort of statement of materiality around the adverse impacts. I mean, we characterize the costs as undue, so we're indicating that we're not going to just take any old cost-based impact. But with respect to diminished supply, you know, maybe it's a meaningfully diminished supply or materially diminished supply, as opposed to any diminishment, if that's a word.
Diminution.
Georgina, I'm going to look to you to weigh into Doug's comment there initially.
Yeah, that could be changed. Again, this is not supposed to be giving too much detail, because that will come in the other things. But I'm trying to think if we actually talk about in undesirable results, if under how much of the supply should be, I would say that none should be diminished, really. And so I kind of like what Chris said of I can't even say that, but that's a difficult word for me to say for some reason. Also realize that, yes, we want a vote so we can go forward with the other parts of the criteria, but we can always change this. And I'm not talking specifically to Doug's question here. It's more in general that there is a possibility to change it. So don't be worried like, oh, we have to, we're going to take action, and we can't change it. Yes, we can change this at any point up until the time we submit it. And even after that, there are opportunities to change it. So this kind of just guides, it's a guiding light to how we develop the other criteria.
So Doug, where would you choose to insert the modification? And what I'd like to do is have you sort of identify where you would choose to insert that modification. Georgina, are you controlling the PowerPoint right now, or is Nick?
I am.
Okay, so we would probably need to have you move from slide view into that view so we can actually modify things. But to start with, and before you start modifying, Doug, I'd like for you to go ahead and look at the statement as it is there right now, and then now we're gonna have to, and identify where you would make that change so that other members of the board can then weigh in as to whether they support your idea or whether they would prefer not to at this time. So
what I would propose is a modification to the last sentence, including materially between the words include and diminished. So adverse impacts include materially diminished supply, maybe that would be then supplies, or undue costs for mitigating such negative impacts.
And the definition, to make sure that folks would have a shared understanding of materially, how would you describe that? Because frankly, I'm not sure I understand what you're meaning by it.
Well, I would rely on common dictionary definitions the same way we're relying on those for undue. What's the definition of undue? I think consistent with the notion that this statement should not be too specific, I think this is directionally indicating that the board wants to make sure that whatever measurable objectives we establish or any undesirable outcomes we identify are non-trivial.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and open up the floor. I see that Jack would like to weigh in with a comment and Ruth would like to weigh in a comment. I don't know whether those are in response to what Doug has proposed. So let me just in sort of order and point of order, let's do this. I want to go to Jack and I'm going to go to Ruth. If the two of you have specific comments to Doug's point, I would like for you to go ahead and lead with those first so we can hear them. I then would like to be staying on this topic of any other comments about this, so we're not hopping around too much. This is an example of where in a virtual context things are a little challenging. So I'm going to go to Jack here. Jack, please go ahead.
Okay. First, I do have a comment about what Doug said, then I have a different issue. I wasn't clear what undue costs are. I think Doug meant something about that, but I'm not sure what that means. What undue cost means. I'm just not sure what the description means. So I guess I'd like to understand what that means. And then my second point is, and this kind of plays out through some of the other slides that we haven't gotten to yet. And I'm not sure we need to change anything here, but I want to just ask the question because it's the first time it came up for me. If there's a potential conflict in my mind between material reduction in supplies and higher costs. I would agree either one is a adverse impact, but how does that play out if we're trying to avoid adverse impacts and we have to go one way or the other? You know, is it okay to have material to raise the costs a lot because that's the only way we can get rid of diminished supplies? So I guess I just want to plant the idea that I think it's more calls out to me more in other slides, but for me, there's a potential conflict between those two things. In other words, it may cost a lot of money to bring the supply back up. And so how do you deal with both of those? Or do you not raise the costs up and leave the supplies down? So
right. So what I'd like to do in order to allow some hopefully fluidity here, I've got notes of your comments, and my presumption is that Georgina is as well. I'd like to move on to Ruth and to Chris. I see the comment that's been written by Eden, and then allow Georgina and or myself to respond collectively. I think one thing that I want to just say briefly, if I may, Georgina and Ruth, before we go, is that a couple of things in the broader context of Sigma, and this is to a point that Ethan just asked the question on. Ethan, no, I don't believe that Ethan's question about when we say that things can be changed in the future, does that mean easily changed or requiring unanimous vote? I would have to really look back to Chris perhaps and Perrette, but I do not believe that any of your votes require unanimity, although that is a goal that you have identified as a board. But I do not believe that your board relies on unanimity for all of its votes in terms of your decision rule. To a point, Jack, that you just made a minute ago, which in my mind, I'm boiling down to that sort of cost-benefit analyses that is going to eventually take place of, you know, we have materially diminished supplies, but we have costs that might be in place to adjust that, and what's going to take precedence. That is something that we're actually going to be touching on a little bit later, but it's probably just as well we talk a little bit right now that this is an example of where at the end of the day, Sigma, as I've said many times before, Sigma reflects or illustrates a combination of technical data that is brought to you all as a board to weigh, and then your value judgments as board members and as representatives of your constituency. At almost all places along the way in Sigma, and it will be reflected even a little bit later tonight, should we be able to get to the groundwater elevation discussion. At the end of the day, it's not so much what the data is showing you, but it's the kinds of value judgments that you are going to have to make as a board, whether those value judgments have to do with physical impacts or whether those value judgments have to do with the cost of something and what constitutes a reasonable or not reasonable cost. So that's where the squishiness comes in, and frankly, that's where the necessity for a really robust conversation amongst you as a board comes in. That's a broad answer. With that, and just as an overarching framing, let me go to Ruth and let's get her comments, and then Chris, and then we'll double back around to some answers from Georgina and perhaps myself.
Okay, so I'm wondering, do we really even want to be talking about diminished supply on this statement, because we're doing groundwater quality, not quantity here?
Okay.
Can you answer that immediately, or?
What I'd like to do is just go ahead and get all the comments from everybody and then sort of hand it over to Georgina. So we're kind of getting all the comments first and then getting all the responses. Chris, go ahead.
Oh, wait, I've still got a couple more things to say.
Right. Go ahead.
Just wordsmithing is easier. I think reduced would be simpler than diminished. And up in the second line, SMGWA projects or management activities, I see, just say SMGWA activities. It's sort of dense, and I'd like to reduce the density of the prose.
Okay.
You can call it prose.
All right. Very good. Chris, go ahead.
I was just going to say, for Doug's point, I think it makes sense if we're going to put a modifier in front of cost, we should have one in front of diminished supply. And significant would also work, even though I know it's in the title, but that would be the same idea.
Okay. All right. Very good. So, in no particular order, we have the question about what is really meant by undue costs and how do we interpret that. Whether why do we want to even talk about diminished supplies since we're dealing with groundwater quality rather than quantity? Whether it makes sense to minimize the pros to just say SMGMA activities rather than projects or management activities. And then lastly, if we're going to be using a modifier on the term of costs, would we not be using some kind of modifier with regards to supplies? And Chris, I'm going to look to you on that just really quickly first. Do you construe that the word diminished is not a similar modifier to the word supply as undue is the cost?
No, because it doesn't take into account time. You could have diminished supply for 1 year or 2 years, and then it comes back up. It just sounds like it means if there's any change down, even if it's temporary, it's a problem. So I would think it would have to be a significant diminishment or a meaningful diminishment, just like undue cost. It would be like saying there can't be any costs.
Okay.
Right? No change to what we're spending.
All right. Thank you. Okay, Georgina, I'm going to be looking to you to start us off here in some of these responses. We'll start with the framing of undue costs and what is meant or intended to be meant by that. Any insights to offer?
I think I will punt and give that maybe to Perrette, being a water district who would know what undue cost would mean to them. Perrette, if you don't mind.
Very smart, Georgina. I actually have a slightly different take on this. I know we can continue on this path of making it better, but this is probably the reason why our meetings are going to go long. So maybe one way of handling, because this is just the first statement of significant and reasonable, maybe we need to take it back to the reviewers, editorial reviewers, the volunteers who just decide that this is good enough and move it on. Because this has been coming back to you 3 times now, and every time there's something slightly different that we could be making better. And I don't know how to make 11 directors to agree on every word otherwise. So just process. But before what you said, Dave, about requiring the response to Eden requiring unanimous vote, what Georgina meant by it can be further revised and amended, she meant by before the GSP is approved, because this is iterative process, and if all of you accepting the language now does not mean that you have made the final decision what goes into that plan. So considering that, then maybe when we get through the MTs and MOs, the minimum thresholds and management objectives, measurable objectives, we could actually then take a look back, and having all of the detail in the later elements, we might feel differently about the statement. So I think I'm encouraging you to, I took all of the notes, all that you made, but I'm truly encouraging you to kind of accept it as is for now, and then potentially later circle back to that as we work through some other components.
And if I can interrupt, Perrette,
Okay.
A very good point on the chat window that I think is the main part of Eden's question is, does it have to be a unanimous vote to change a word in this? And I believe unanimous vote is only for budgetary or money spending issues, and it's a unanimous vote of the member.
The final GSP requires unanimous vote by the member agency representatives.
Right, but changing it before we get there doesn't require a unanimous vote.
No.
Right. So with the advice that Paret has made, but notwithstanding that there are legitimate questions that have been raised right now, Paret, are you okay if we try to at least tackle a couple of these questions that have come up tonight as a means of informing this discussion? I'm not really comfortable with sort of opening something up for questions and then basically telling people, okay, but now we're not going to answer them. So are you okay with us doing that at least?
I'm absolutely okay, but I'm also okay with the language as it was from water agency standpoint, and I'm okay if it gets changed.
Okay. So Georgina, let me then look to you again on this question of supplies, this point that Ruth made about why are we talking about diminished supplies when we're talking about groundwater quality, so we at least get clarity on that.
Because groundwater quality is important to the basin because it means that beneficial users cannot use that water. Part of their supply is gone if it's impacted. That's the reason why. So it's just describing what the adverse impact would be, is that you lose some of your groundwater basin supply.
The point really being then, Ruth, that under SGMA, and particularly with regards to the water quality, water quality impact, this may sound a little arcane, but water quality impacts for the sake of water quality impacts are not really where SGMA is assessing the impact. It is whether or not said water quality impact is actually creating an impact to use, therefore supply, if that makes any sense. Moving on to the other question about the use of the term projects or management activities, Georgina, I'll look to you again. My guess is that's because that's fairly standard nomenclature from SGMA, because that's how we speak in SGMA in terms of actions that might be made in the future, but I just want to check with you if that's correct.
Yeah, it is, but it also, I'm fine with it not being there. Those three words. If to shorten it, I would tend to say shorter is better for this. Okay,
so it would be reasonable to strike that. And then with regards to just to get your opinion, the suggestion of some kind of a modifier regarding significance of diminishment that Chris just spoke about, something analogous to the undue costs. Would you see any problem with that?
No, I tend to agree with him. If it's a short time, maybe, if it, but in reality, most groundwater impacts do not last for a short time. They usually take some time to clean up. So.
Okay. All right. So we've got some feedback, therefore, on the primary questions at this time. We've got a request from Paret, or a suggestion from Paret, that rather than take an action, or if I'm understanding you, Paret, you're saying rather than take an action, perhaps circle back around to the small group of people who were given the responsibility to review this and maybe bring it to them one last time, but with the caveat that it really does need to be, we need to be moving along with this comment. There's, a handful of others that we also have to do in the coming weeks and months. So Paret, am I understanding you that you're saying let's go ahead and punt for right now to try to get an action tonight? Or are you saying?
Not unless, if this, what is on the screen now, meets everybody's understanding and they're in agreement, I think the board could accept it. But if there's more suggestions, we'll just write them down and maybe take it for further deliberation by the editorial volunteers.
Okay, well, I think the only thing that would be missing, presuming that the answer that we gave to Ruth sufficiently accommodated her concerns, the thing that would be missing here would be something along, reflecting what Chris had raised, which is some other qualifier. Chris, do you have a suggestion of a qualifying word to insert?
The one I thought of was significant, but I would leave that up to wordsmithers. That's fine by me. And I would just wonder, is there any reason why we can't approve this now? It's like the undue cost thing. Don't mean to single you out, Jack, but the whole reason undue cost is in there is a comment you had made 1 or 2 times ago. So, you know, if is there a way we can accept this and just say this is good enough, and if there's a wordsmith change, that's something we can almost do on consent agenda, and then we can at least chalk up something.
So I'll look to you first, Chris. Are you comfortable proceeding with this without the qualifier that you had initially suggested? I mean, as a means of just moving things along with and using the same logic you just said, which is we can come back to it?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so that being the case, then Chris is willing to sort of waive further modification, even based on his comment at this time. Therefore, what we have is a comment that says significant unreasonable water quality conditions occur if SMGWA activities degrade the basin's groundwater quality such that it leads to adverse impacts on beneficial users or uses of groundwater or surface water. Adverse impacts include materially diminished supplies or undue costs for mitigating such negative impacts. Is there anybody, I'm going to do a straw poll here first, just to test this. Is anybody opposed? And if you are, we'll need for you to go ahead in the chat mode, write the word opposed, and there's nothing wrong with being opposed. We just have to sort of go through this process. Is there anybody opposed to going ahead and calling a vote and taking an action on this, recognizing, as has been stated a couple times, that this does not prohibit us from coming back and modifying it at a later date? Is anybody opposed to taking an action on this tonight? And I'm going to look to the online chat first. I do not see any opposition. Nick, do we have any member or directors that are on the phone only tonight? So I know to be checking in on that.
I know that we have Director Moran there. I don't believe that unless J.M. Brown showed up, he would be the only alternate that would be eligible to vote in this capacity. Let me, I'm going to unmute the callers again just to kind of do due diligence on that. If you could just bear with me for one moment, please. All right, if you're on the phone and you are a director of SMGWA, if you could kindly speak up at this time. Director Moran, I still have you on mute because you're down in the pile, but I know that you're here, sir.
If you have an opposition, if you are opposed to taking an action on this right now, please go ahead and speak at this time and indicate that you're opposed to even proceeding with an action. Are any board directors or alternates for directors filling in for directors opposed to taking an action on this tonight?
This is Tourette. I just wanted to make a comment that Director Moran is alternate and should not be participating because
Okay.
the other two are present.
All right, great. Thank you very much. So with that, having seen no opposition to that, then what I'm going to suggest is the following. I want to now open the floor for public comment. So we need to open up the floor for any public comment on this statement before the board takes an action. Are there any public comments at this time? First online. I do not see any public comments being logged. Therefore, I will go to the phone. Are there any public comments on the phone, members of the public that would like to weigh in at this time? Okay, hearing none. I will then now move to Director Perry. Director Perry, I believe the question we would like to call is a question of approval. So the question would basically be, does the board approve the draft statement of significant unreasonable degraded water quality as is presented on the screen right now? So the question would be, does the board approve the draft statement of significant unreasonable degraded groundwater quality as is shown on the screen right now? And my understanding is we would take this to a voice vote.
Can I get a motion to that regard?
I move that way, Ruth.
Ruth, okay.
First and second.
Okay, Lou, did you second?
Yes.
Okay, so Ruth Stiles and Lou Ferris, first and second. Okay, is there any further comment? Hearing none, can I get a roll call vote?
Yes, sir. All right. Director Engfer.
Yes.
Director Leopold. Nope, he's not here. My apologies. Director McPherson.
Aye.
Director Cassidy. Director Cassidy, are you there, sir?
It seems to be, we need to hear you.
Give me a thumbs up.
Okay.
We need to hear because we have people that are not on computer. So we need to be able to hear those votes, not only hand signals.
Can you unmute him, Nick?
One moment.
Aye.
Got it.
Nice delay.
Franklin.
Oh. That was awesome.
All right, Director Franklin, can I get your vote, please?
Aye.
All right, Director Pollock,
Aye.
Director Dillis,
Yes.
Director Ferris,
Aye.
Director Henry,
Abstain.
Director Stiles,
Aye.
and Director Perry.
Aye.
All right, we have 9 votes in favor.
Okay, thank you. So that's excellent. We did something. I'm going to hand it back to Dave now and directly back to Georgina.
Go to Georgina, please.
Okay.
Georgina, you with us?
Okay, yeah, I'm here, sorry. Having cleared that, we're gonna go on to how our approach is looking to how we set the management criteria for groundwater quality. And these were discussed at previous board meetings and what I'm used to guide how we develop all these numbers that we're required to do. First is that there was strong sentiment that really this is general, but it was pretty strong that groundwater quality remains at current concentrations or better. And we want to use state drinking water standards wherever possible. But we need to recognize that because groundwater and surface water are so closely connected in this basin, and there is known impacts on the surface water from groundwater that has a high in nitrate that feeds into the rivers and creeks, that we have to consider that there is an impact on surface water from groundwater. And so we may have to adjust some of our thresholds because of that. You'll recall that I talked about this total maximum daily load, TMDL, and it's because of that we need to have a lower minimum threshold than the drinking water standard, because the river is at a higher level than what it should be to protect all the uses downstream. And so we are recommending a lower number, and I'll talk about that in the next slide. I'm going to pause here because I want to hear if anyone has any comments on this.
Okay, so opening the floor. This is a pretty key distinction as we start continuing on with this, particularly the last one that we are using as a baseline, the state drinking water standards. However, as indicated under that third one, nitrate in the groundwater must be tied to conditions in the San Lorenzo River and therefore the TMDL. So any questions or comments at this time?
Yeah, this is McPherson. The second, use state water drinking standards where possible. Is the nitrate standard is the only one? Is that the only one where it's not possible? Or I mean, how does that read? Are there any? What are the other ones that might not be possible?
That's the only one that's not possible.
Okay.
Yeah.
I put a comment on the chat. I don't know if anyone saw that.
Yeah, I saw. I was just about to get to you. So go ahead, Chris, please.
Okay, just a question, Georgina, in general. Now, I think there are times when the nitrite concentrations in the San Lorenzo are not necessarily caused by groundwater, because they can be caused by runoff. And when is runoff not groundwater? Like it can be agricultural, or could be bird droppings. It can be any number of things. It could even be a shallow septic. Is that considered groundwater, or a failing septic? That's not necessarily what I think of, or common parlance, as groundwater. It's more a runoff issue. So at what point are we saying, well, it's our groundwater doing it, but it's more complicated than that?
Yeah, you're right. There is also contributions from surface sources that run off that goes into the creeks. And I told you about this study done in 1995 by the county, and John might want to chime in here, where they looked at all the different sources of nitrate in the river. And they found that a good portion of it, I'm trying to think, is it a third or more than a third, is coming from groundwater. So we can't discount it. They are working on trying to address all those surface problems and surface sources of nitrate, and they are also trying to address the septic tank John, are you there? Can you help me?
John actually weighed in. He wants to get a comment in, so let's go to John.
Okay.
And yeah, so it might be helpful for you to have your chat box open as well, if you can. And so we're going to go to John to respond, and then Lou Ferris is in the queue. Go ahead, John.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. The nitrate TMDL, the objectives for the river are based on the summertime nitrate levels, when we really don't have a significant runoff contribution. So it really is based on the contribution from groundwater to the river and to the tributaries during the summertime. And I think it's something like 60% of the nitrate is coming in the river is coming from the Santa Margarita groundwater basin.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to Lou and then to Doug.
Yes, the first bullet item, general sentiment, is to ensure that groundwater quality remains at current concentrations or better. Are you specifying that those are for the currently tested substances or species or concentrations, and not things that have been tested in the past?
Well, what's probably more things are tested now than they were in the past. There are hundreds and hundreds of chemical constituents tested by a whole suite that's required by the state. In the past, that wasn't as rigorous as it is now. So we're testing for more now than we used to test for. So I'm not sure of your question.
Well, my question is this, talking with Nate Gillespie at the SLVWD district, he indicates that we have had contributions from fluoride and mercury in the past, but they're not current problems. So my question is, do we want to consider those things that we've tested in the past and had problems with, and include at least a thought about that? Because if we don't, then we're just assuming that even though they're not a problem now, that they won't be a problem in the future, and I'm not sure that's a good assumption. Also, the state recommends that we do monitoring that does not have specifications attached to it. Have you thought about any of those to be added as well?
So on the next slide, I was going to describe that the chemical constituents, and I will call them constituents sometimes, Jack, I'll sometimes forget to call them chemical constituents, are selected because they have at some point in the past exceeded the drinking water standard, or because they're used to commonly monitor the health of a basin. And so some of those other ones, they can be added But as you saw, there are 170 or so charts that are related to the 15 or 16 representative monitoring points, and every time you add another constituent, you're adding another 15 charts. That's okay, but it just, in reporting, that gets really cumbersome. So we want to try and streamline that as much as possible, because there's always a cost associated with more. And so we choose constituents that we know will represent maybe a group of constituents, and so chemical constituents. And so that's what we've tried to do. I'm not saying that our list is the end of the list. We can definitely add others, and there are some in here, in fact, that are historically were detected and are no longer detected, and you'll see those in the example chemographs. And so we can add some, but we just have to be mindful of what we do add.
Let me be clear, I'm not suggesting that we add 100 and some additional chemical constituents. I'm just saying that we should consider more than just what's foremost in our mind, and that is what we're testing currently as we go forward. That's all.
No, I agree with you, and we can take some of those. I have no problem with that. Dave, I'm not sure if you dropped off, but I think
yeah, no, I'm here. Sorry, I had my phone muted. We're going to Doug now, please.
Yeah, a little hokey pokey routine there. Sorry, but it ended up kind of building on the conversation between Lou and Georgina in the context of this nitrate discussion, as a just to make sure folks are thinking about it. You know, City of Santa Cruz and its customers are all beneficial users of the, you know, due to the groundwater surface water interaction. And, you know, nitrate here is in essence acting as a marker or a biomarker for maybe a lot of other things that may relate to septic. We do pick up CECs in our testing downstream. And so hearing that we're open to adding other specific items to the testing regime is encouraging, because we may at some point find that nitrate isn't the best marker for a variety of reasons. And I want us to keep top of mind that surface water considerations need to be taken into account.
All right, thank you. Any further response to that, Georgina? Otherwise, we will continue on. Okay, all right. I do not see any further comments in the line, so we'll continue, please.
So this is the table of most of the constituents that we've looked at. They are, like I mentioned, we call them constituents of concern, and they are set the sustainability management criteria if they have exceeded drinking water standards in the past or currently, or are commonly used to assess health of the basin. So what you see there under the second column, the standard, is it the secondary or primary drinking water standard? Some of these only have secondary. It's secondary because it's aesthetic standard, and that would be TDS and chloride have those. And the third column gives you the drinking water standard, which we are adopting as proposing to adopt here as the minimum threshold. And except for nitrate, which its primary standard is 10, and we're bringing that all the way down to 3, if we have any hope of meeting the TMDL in the river. So the TDS minimum threshold, also I should point out, it's the upper secondary limit. The state gives you different kinds of limits to use. You could use the upper limit or the recommended limit, and there is another limit that is of 500 milligrams per liter, and the county of Santa Cruz has taken 1,000. That's what it uses to look at groundwater quality across the entire county. And so we've adopted the same same limit that they have selected. So, and then iron and manganese are actually not on this table. They are included as constituents of concern because they are elevated in the basin. And like I have no problem adding other constituents to this if they have regularly exceeded these drinking water standards in the past, and if they are of concern in the basin. We also have to think about yeah, that there are so many. I guess I'm thinking back to Lou's question a bit, that some of these are the markers. I think Doug used a good word of marker, and some of these on here, they're no longer detected, but we have still put them on here. All the wells that are going to be used as part of the monitoring program for this and our representative monitoring points have at least samples taken every 3 years and a huge range of constituents. And also some of these ones, the constituents of emerging concern that there are no standards for, that Lou mentioned, those are also sampled, and those will go into the database that would be used to evaluate water quality. And we can add other ones in the future as well. If anything becomes a constituent of concern, we can still add them. Dave?
I'm here. Okay. Any further comments or questions from folks on this? Okay, let's move ahead.
Okay, so then our approach for setting up measurable objectives is that when I initially presented the idea to you, I was thinking maybe we would use 5-year average of, if we wanted to keep groundwater quality where it is now, we would examine the last 5 years and look at the average quality. But in doing that, some wells are only sampled every 3 years, so we only get 1 or 2 records in that 5-year period, or actually 1. And so then we went to 10 years. We would like to have a minimum number of samples of 3 to be more statistically correct here. 10 years mostly allows for those 3 samples to fall in that 10-year period, but sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes we only get 2. So then I'm proposing that we would then just make sure we have at least 3 samples. We take the next sample, which might be, 12th on the 12th year. And we would average those to come up with our measurable objective, which again, it's not enforceable. We don't have to achieve it, but it should be. I mean, when I say we don't have to, we're not going to be penalized, or you're not judged against it. Are you sustainable or not? It's where you as a basin would like to have your water quality. But it should be achievable. So you can't set something really high because you really want the best, even better quality than there is now. That's not probably possible. So you have to be realistic. So that's what we're proposing, is to have just look at the last 10 years or a little bit beyond that to come up with the measurable objective.
Okay, so any comments or questions on this? This is a pretty important variable that you're going to see come up a few more times here. So if there are any questions or concerns, now would be a good time to start getting those aired out. So anything from the board, either on the phone or online? Jack, go ahead.
Yes, 3 years at some level sounds like a long time to me, and I know there's an expense and all that, but can a lot of things go wrong in 3 years? Is that, I guess if we had a clue, if we knew something, there'd been a spill or something, we would monitor that more closely. And I presume this is being suggested because it is reasonable in your professional judgment, but I just want to ask the question, how much of a risk are we taking to only measure every 3 years?
Yeah, so this monitoring frequency is set by the state, the Division of Drinking Water. they set that, and that these samples the results have to be reported to them, and they set that frequency based off the risk, just like you say. So say in Santa Cruz or in SoCal area where there's seawater intrusion, they have to test much more frequently. If you were right near a contamination source, you would need to test much more frequently, and you would want to. So those wells that have the 3 years on them are ones that really have no threats.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go to Lou, and then also to John Ricker with a follow-on response. But let's go to Lou first, please.
I have to apologize. I could not get my comment in fast enough for the last slide, so I'm actually going back to minimum thresholds, and I have one last question, and that is, we've talked about non-viable, that is, chemical constituents. One thing that's conspicuous in its absence on that list is the viable that we do typically, which is coliform bacteria. I've mentioned that only because we have had at least 2 boil orders that I'm aware of up in SLVWD in as many years. So why would that not be considered a quality constituent as well?
It could be if it is something that a project that the GSA does would cause that to happen. And I'm not sure. It's usually a problem within the well itself. It's not to do with other activities around it.
Is that saying that we are not going to add it to the list? It's not clear to me.
I don't think that it's. I have not seen it in any of the other GSPs. It's usually because of the well. It's not to do with the basin. It's not to do with the groundwater in general. The groundwater doesn't have that. It has the iron bacteria. Yes, it has that. And so we do look at iron, but a well that has bacteriological counts, maybe John can fill in on this as well when he responds to some of the other question.
So, John?
Yeah, I can. Sure. The total coliform, Georgina's correct, that really is related to surface contamination, some sort of a surface water getting into a well or into a water system. You don't find bacteria in groundwater typically. I mean, it's the soil does a pretty good job of filtering that out. So if you've got a total coliform issue, that's a surface contamination, surface water contamination. And then with regards to frequency of sampling for nitrate, Georgina is also correct there that the systems that really have practically non-detectable levels of nitrate sample once every 3 years. If they even start to see any kind of nitrate levels in their system, then they're on an annual or a quarterly sampling programs is related to whether or not you've got nitrate issues. And if a sample did turn up somewhat elevated, then they would be put onto a much more frequent sampling program right away.
All right, thank you. We'll double back around to see if there's any further questions to what John just said, but for right now, okay, Chris, you've withdrawn your comment. All right. Are there any final comments or questions that folks have at this time on this slide?
I'm just curious, this is Bruce. These are frequency standards by the state. If there should be a drought or something, do they change these number of years, or how does that work? If there's a 2 or 3 year drought, do they increase the number of tests or anything?
They don't usually change that based on a drought unless you do start to get a pick up something that's you know, a higher level of a constituent, but generally don't do that.
Okay, Bruce, did that answer your question? Bruce?
Yes, I've gone to mute, sorry.
Okay, all right. And also, Bruce, are you on phone or are you online right now?
I'm online.
Okay, just for consistency purposes, if you've got questions, it would be helpful if you just go ahead and type in under the chat box and just write the word comment, and that way I know that you're in the queue, and that way I can be treating everybody equitably, if that's all right with you, please.
Fine. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, all right, Georgina, let's proceed, please.
Okay, so now I've explained to you the minimum thresholds are generally going to be drinking water standards, except for nitrate, and that measurable objectives will be an average of recent concentrations. So you are going to see a number of these chemographs, and you got a whole stack of them. Maybe you peruse through them. I don't imagine you looked at every single one, but they all have the same kind of information. They all have the orange line on top that represents minimum threshold for drinking water standard. And then they have a green dashed line, which is the measurable objective, the average TDS from the last 10 years. And then it has a chart, the data, the concentrations plotted as these points, and they're joined up with lines. And that's representing concentration. On the horizontal axis at the bottom is time, and on the vertical axis is TDS concentration. So the higher the number, higher things are plotted, the higher the concentration. And in concentrations that's not, you don't want high concentrations. You want them to be low. So this is how you can see, and this we did kind of in response to Doug had asked, what does this look like? When, you know, I had said we would, you know, probably have these minimum thresholds based off drinking water standards, measurable objectives of some kind of average. He said, what does that look like? So that's why we did all of those charts, and I thank my staff for doing that. There's a lot of work to get those out, but it is very useful because you can see it's a great snapshot of where each well is with those constituents. And so I'm going to go through a series of these. There'll be 9 slides in total, and I'm not going to stop at each one. I'm going to go through that because I want to point out some features that are important to take note of when you're looking at these high chemographs. These are called chemographs because they have chemistry on them. We are going to pause here because I want to make sure that you are comfortable with what you are seeing on the charts before we start stepping through them.
Yeah, so let's think of this as kind of a tutorial slide to really orient you to what you're going to see in a perhaps more complex way without the descriptions. So we're really wanting to make sure that the next slides, like Georgina said, are going to be meaningful to you, and you understand what some of the symbology and the colors of the language, of the font and things like that mean. So any questions at this time, or folks feel like they've got what Georgina's laid out here as a basis to sort of orient you through the coming slides? Any questions at all? To just, again, we really want to make sure that this flow of slides, because there's several of them and they're representative of a whole bunch of others that are available in the packet. But for right now, anything that folks want to ask, to be sure you really understand what you're about to see. There's nothing wrong with not understanding it. We just want to make sure. Okay, go ahead, Georgina.
Okay, so the first one is TDS, total dissolved solids. It's a measure of salinity, and the Santa Margarita aquifer. And I'm going to try and cover different aquifers and in different areas of the basin. I just don't want to just show you one area. This is what the data looks like. This is a well that is sampled every 3 years. So you see in the each of the dots are every 3 years, and on top of this chart I've plotted the measurable objective, which is an average. It's actually the average of these 2 points. I think if we take the 3rd point, it will be very similar to what it is now. And then we have the minimum threshold drinking water standard of 1,000, and we're way away from that in this well. But that's generally what it looks like. This is, like I said, Santa Margarita aquifer, very good quality. It's kind of the best quality water in terms of TDS in the basin. The next one, the next one is total dissolved solids in the Lompico aquifer, and this is in the Scotts Valley area. This is a well that has had an increasing trend over time, a little bit here, but it's still below. There are some spikes here at some point, and those haven't been seen again. But the average equates to the green dashed line, and then again we plot the same minimum threshold as 1,000, and so that's what that one looks like. Nitrate. This is, I'm showing you a well here that does have nitrate in. So now this Quail Hollow area that I said the TDS is really good, the nitrate is not so good because of it being the Santa Margarita aquifer and vulnerable to surface sources of contamination and the septic systems that are plentiful in this area. There have been these slightly elevated nitrate concentrations over time. They go up and down, and that's related to rainfall and where the groundwater levels are. They do fluctuate like this. This is quite normal. The average over the last few years, and you see this is a well that normally is actually sampled every 3 years for general things, but nitrate is an example where it's monitored more, tested more frequently for nitrate because it has higher nitrate. So even though I said that the wells are sampled every 3 years, that's in general. There are specific constituents that might get called out by the state that they need to be sampled more regularly, and so nitrate is an example of that. So there are more records here, and now we have a minimum threshold of 3. Remember, the drinking water standard is at 10, and so people can drink water up to 10, and it's not dangerous to the health according to the state, and but we have lowered that. So yes, there are some exceedances of that, and we will be talking in depth about what we do about such a case like that. Well, actually, I could mention it right now. So if it's something that's happened in the past, because iron and nitrate, manganese are going to be the same as nitrate here, and arsenic also sometimes has gone above the drinking water standard. So what do you do about that? Well, because of our statement of significant and reasonable, and that it's all to do with, has the GSA caused this? This clearly is not caused by the GSA. It's been happening for years. And there's no real increasing trend here. You just see it fluctuates up and down, kind of around where that measurable objective line is, the green line. And it's no fault of the GSA, and it will continue to do so. We just don't want the GSA to make it worse. So, for example, they put in a project that pushes somehow, I don't know how, but maybe it adds nitrate to the groundwater. That would never be allowed to happen, but say it did, and it moved that to a place where it was previously great water, no nitrate. Well, that would be an undesirable result. That would be significant and unreasonable. And so you would have to build into your statement of undesirable, and we'll be getting into that in depth in the next few slides, what undesirable results really mean. But you can build in some flexibility to say, yes, you can sometimes exceed that minimum threshold for a short amount of time, and it's not that the whole basin is unsustainable now. So, the DWR has provided some of these tools to be flexible and to give you a way to be realistic about things. Okay, so that's nitrate in the Santa Margarita. And then this one is a very boring one because it's nitrate in the Lompico. And if you remember, the Lompico is below a number of other layers, and so it's very protected. This one here is in the Pueblo Yard area, and it actually has little black squares which are representing non-detects, and they're all the same. And that means that the laboratory testing it was not able to detect nitrate at using the analysis method that they used. And that is, the state also says what that method should be. So the measurable objective here is assigned that non-detect level of 0.4 micrograms per liter. So that's what you see, and a lot of the wells in the Lompico look like this. There are just no non-detects the whole time. Sometimes you might get just in the one, if you flip through those charts that were in your packet or online, you'll see that sometimes you get a blip and you might get 1, but it doesn't get above 3 in general. And there are nothing is at 3. We don't have anything consistently over 3 micrograms per liter, which would be exceeding the minimum threshold. This is arsenic, and arsenic does occur naturally in the basin, in the Lompico Formation. So this is a well again in the Lompico Formation. And the reason why it's important is that it's been important that we have this as a constituent of concern is that if a project that is implemented in the basin to help achieve sustainability, to help improve groundwater levels, if we bring in imported water or some other kind of water that's not groundwater and inject it into the ground, there is a possibility that there is a chemical reaction that happens that will increase arsenic concentrations. Iron and manganese can also increase the same way. And so that's why we would want to monitor that. But here we have a case where, yes, there have been higher concentrations of arsenic in the past. And if this was happening, just the once-off spike every now and again in the future, then that should not be regarded as unsustainable. So we need to devise our sustainability management criteria to take that type of thing into account. So arsenic and iron, which is the next one, it's very kind of up and down. It's known to do this. This is what it looks like. It generally, most of the data follows a certain baseline, but every now and again you get it going up. And this can, and iron and manganese are very, they can change based off the redox environment, you know, oxidations and all that chemistry stuff that most of us don't know too much about, but it can change quite quickly like this, but it's just a once-off thing and then it goes back down. So this is a case, you see, we don't even have the minimum threshold on here because it's exceeded all the time. It's 0.3, which would be under the average groundwater iron concentrations for this well. So in this case, exceeding the minimum threshold is not undesirable. The state's not going to come and say, well, your basin's you're managing it undesirably. It was already like this to start with. But we do want to keep an eye on this, because if we inject water into the basin that does cause an increase in iron, we want to know that if that happens. And you would clearly see it, because you would be getting a lot more spikes that occur after you start injecting, and they are maybe higher than the ones that you've seen historically. And the manganese is similar to iron. It does fluctuate just the same. And again, the minimum threshold is 0.05, which is half of half of the measurable objective. And so again, there's no second line on here because it's actually underneath the measurable objective. This is where we are, and there are a lot of the wells do exhibit this. In fact, I think there's only 2 or 3 that don't exhibit this exceeding the minimum threshold already. This is a VOC, a volatile organic compound, that was measured in the Quail Hollow area in the Santa Margarita Aquifer. Again, it was in the 2000s, early 2000s, and it's not been seen since. So there's non-detect since then. And so this well would be given the non-detect value for measurable objectives. And most of the wells have this. There are very few, you know, I don't know, 3 or 4 wells that have been impacted by VOCs. Another one we have here is MTBE, a gasoline additive that is found here in this one well that is not an active well for Scotts Valley Water District, but is still sampled here. And it also historically, well, you see it was clear, and then it started to be impacted by MTBE, and that has gone down. It still has detections of MTBE, but they are well below the drinking water standard, which is at 0.013 up here. So that's what, there are very few wells with these types of chemicals in them that are from contamination sources like the dry cleaners and Watkins Johnson gas stations and things like that. I'm sure you remember me saying that the basin is pretty lucky in that regard. There are very few impacts. Okay, and then that I was referring to that big stack of chemographs, and in front of each of those there is a summary table that says what the representative monitoring point is, what where they are screened, where it's pumping from, should I say, what the minimum threshold would be, and then the measurable objective based off those average numbers. And I have been told that there is a well here, Passanine Tempo 6, that is actually not going to be included, so it's not being used for water supply, so it won't be sampled anymore. So that doesn't make it a very good representative monitoring point if we don't have data, so that would be taken out. And that would leave us here with 15 wells to use as representative monitoring points. And I would say any other well in the basin that starts getting groundwater quality data that we can use, we will include in this, because this is basically every well that has a history of groundwater quality data and is continuing to have samples taken, primarily because that's a state requirement, but also because the water districts are, they need to know what their water quality is, because they need to treat some of it, and so they need to know fairly regularly what those concentrations are that they're treating. And what they're treating for mostly is iron and manganese. Incidentally, they treat for arsenic when they treat for iron and manganese, and then they also, some of them are treating for the VOCs, the very low concentrations of VOCs. Dave.
Okay, so we've got Lou in the queue. So Lou, go ahead, please.
Question for Perrette. Do you not treat your water with a sequestering agent to mask the iron and manganese taste?
I'm not sure. I would say no, but I'm not 100% certain, so I can get back to you on that.
Okay, well, I've been told from reliable sources that we have done treatment on water to mask the bad taste of iron and manganese in the past. And I just wanted to point out that something that Georgina said, that we exceed the state limit for iron and manganese, and it's not an undesirable situation. Well, I would disagree, because if we're treating it to mask it, then clearly it is undesirable. Otherwise, why would we be treating it?
Well, we do treat for iron and manganese to a certain extent, but it's still the flavor is still there. The groundwater kind of has that depending on the mineral environment where it's born, it does pick up and continue carrying on the flavors of that.
Right, you're not removing it, you're just sequestering it so that it won't be as objectionable. But my point is really that it is an undesirable event. Otherwise, why would you be treating the water?
Okay, Lou, I have to reiterate that the undesirable results we're talking about here are purely as a result of implementing the GSP. Yeah, we have to separate that. Yes, it's undesirable in the general sense. That's why it's got a secondary standard. But in terms of the GSP, it is not it's not a result, an undesirable result of the GSP being implemented. It's already there. Undesirable result of the GSP being implemented. It's already there.
And it's again, it's one of the water quality factor in Sigma is one of, again, those kind of somewhat challenging items in that it is not, nor was it ever intended to be a proxy or de facto water quality regulatory tool. There are obviously a number of existing water quality regulatory tools under the Clean Water Act as implemented in the state under Porter Cologne. And so it's a different type of standard that we're looking at because this is not like a proxy again for dealing with water quality impacts. Let's go to Rick Rogers and then to Rosemary.
Thank you. Just a quick comment. The district's San Lorenzo Valley Water District's Pastample 6 well was just recently destroyed to state and county standards, and we came back and re-drilled a well which is Pastample 8 now, 20 feet, north of the existing Paso 6. It's a replacement well to the same design standards. So there is a replacement well, but the Pastample 6 is no longer there.
And Rick, is it screened in the exact same place, or is it different screen?
I can get you that information. Martin Feeney was our design, and I'm surprised that we didn't supply this information to you. But I do
actually have it, but there's no water quality results for it yet.
Okay,
I think maybe one.
Okay, we will get you the complete packet.
Okay, great.
Okay, let's go to Rosemary.
Hi there. Hey, I just wanted to respond to Lou's comment regarding the iron and manganese. Naturally occurring constituents in groundwater, iron and manganese being really great examples of those, are things that are treated because of either aesthetic or regulatory requirements, but it does not mean that the water is not a quality source. And I just wanted to sort of talk about groundwater treatment and surface water treatment. They're very highly regulated. They're based on a number of objectives, whether it's microbial safety or whether it's chemical safety for long-term exposure, microbial exposure for acute kind of diseases and what have you. And I just want us to be clear, and I think it's been mentioned by Georgina here a couple of times, that SGMA is not really about making sure that you have quality drinking water. It's about having groundwater resources that are well managed, so that if they are drinking water sources, then the whole layers of regulatory sort of programs and what have you that apply to producing and delivering drinking water, whether it's the source itself or it's how you manage your distribution system, those things are then, come into play. And I do think that the Santa Margarita groundwater really from all of these aquifers is a quality source of supply that we're really lucky to have, as is the case with the San Lorenzo River, even though it has its issues.
Any follow-up from Georgina to what Rosemary just said?
Nothing.
Okay, let's go on to Doug. Go ahead, please, Doug.
Since Rosemary was responding to Lou, and I see he weighed back in, Lou, if you had a follow-up to Rosemary, why don't you go ahead?
Lou, did you have a follow-on to what Rosemary said, or was it something different?
Yes, I do. Just to make my point clear, is that the way that Georgina was representing iron and manganese, it struck me that one could draw the conclusion that there was no problem. And I just want to point out that there is a problem. It's just not a new problem, and therefore not something we should be considering with Santa Margarita. I agree with that thought. I'm just making it clear that I don't want people to think that iron and manganese exceeding the state limit is not a problem. Because if it wasn't a problem, we wouldn't be dealing with it or treating it. So I just want to make that clear, that it's not a problem for Santa Margarita, but it is a problem, and therefore something that we should still keep on in our mind for future consideration.
Dave, can I respond a little bit? Lou,
Please.
Yes?
Yeah, please.
Okay, Lou, I don't disagree with you, but I think we're sort of talking nuances. The reason that we treat for iron and manganese, one is for taste and the other one is, frankly, if you wash your clothes with water that has a lot of manganese in it, it makes a lot of nasty black spots, and that's not, most people don't like that. So those are aesthetic and other kinds of issues. I think that the nature of the problem we're talking about here is a different kind of a thing. It's a drinking water or public water system issue versus a naturally occurring constituent in our groundwater quality that doesn't require us to do anything about it because we're never going to make it go away. It exists. So I think it's a nuanced thing, but I don't disagree generally with the comment that you're making.
And that comment, as it should be, is duly noted in the record of the board's discussion. Let's go back to Doug.
Thanks. I wanted to just kind of circle back around on what I thought I heard Georgina say about the various representative monitoring points that we have. This 15 or 16, it sounds like maybe we're back to 16.
Yeah.
And I thought I heard, this is it. But I guess I wanted to clarify that it's within our purview, not necessarily to make a decision tonight, but it's within our purview to add other representative monitoring points if we find that these don't truly measure everything we need to measure where we need to measure it. Am I fair in making that assumption going forward?
Yes, you can add at any point, especially if a project happens. And with a project, say, that's injecting water, associated with that would be a number of monitoring wells. The state would be very rigorous in a monitoring program that it would require the proponent to have, and that some of those wells, in fact, would become representative monitoring points as well. And you can do that at any point during the, after implementation of the GSP.
Okay. Any further follow-up, Doug?
No, that answers my question. Thank you.
All right,
very
let's
much.
go ahead. Great. Georgina, let's proceed, please.
Yep. Okay. So we've looked at what they look like, but in talking about minimum thresholds, they are not the be-all and end-all about determining sustainability in a basin. We actually, in Sigma, we're mandated to define something called undesirable results. And I've talked about those before in the past. It's a little bit of a tricky concept. But minimum thresholds and undesirable results go hand in hand. They're very closely related. This is from a previous slide when I talked about that. I was hoping it might trigger some memory for you on that. It's quite a few meetings ago now. But it's the undesirable results for each sustainability indicator that we have to describe and avoid. We have to avoid having these undesirable results. If we do that, DWR looks at us at the basin and says, you are sustainable. That's their measure, is on undesirable results. It's not on minimum thresholds. Minimum threshold is just a part of the undesirable result definition that we're going to come up with. And so the next slide, what I used before as well, and the reason why you have these undesirable results, is how you define it, is how you can accommodate flexibility. So it then will address those occasions where you have those occasional spikes in concentrations that doesn't make you undesirable. And for example, so some people to accommodate some flexibility into their statement of undesirable, well, their definition of undesirable result is so you can say, well, it's an undesirable result if more than 10% of the representative monitoring points have an exceedance of the minimum threshold for any chemical. So it gives you a little bit of wriggle room there to have that. And in some basins, they done this exact same thing. And this could be forever. So they're in that 10%, they're saying, well, then you can have some loss of your supply, right? Because it's not 10% of the basin, but a small portion of the basin is now, you've lost that supply unless you're treating it or in that water, or there's some other mitigating method that you can implement here. So this is an example, and the next slide is some more examples. The first example is no flexibility, basically. I say less, but it's really no, and it might be more protective. It's a statement, or well, a definition of undesirable result that says it's undesirable if any representative monitoring point exceeds any minimum threshold. That's really strict. So you cannot have an exceedance at all, ever. And I don't think any basins are doing that. DWR realizes that's not realistic, really, unless you set a really, if you set in water quality, if you set a minimum threshold that is really high, might be above the drinking water standard. I don't think anyone's done that either. Everyone's either done the drinking water standard or an agricultural standard or something that applies to their users, or less. So that is less flexibility, more protective. Then the other example is an example where you build more flexibility in. I'm not sure if it could be less protective, but that might be debatable. But so here you say more than a certain percentage of representative monitoring points exceed their minimum thresholds. Some people have left it at that, but I would prefer to say over a certain time period. So you maybe allow that to be exceeded for a certain amount of time. Another way to do this is to maybe do a moving average, or so you're not using just a value and say, you know, if a value exceeds it over at any point, that's undesirable, or it's maybe one of those that you allow to be in your, if you choose a percentage that can exceed that minimum threshold. So that is an example. And the next slide I'm going to get, it builds onto that example too. It reminds you about those chemographs I just showed you about, where you do have some exceedances over here in this one in arsenic, and over here with what is this, nitrate. There are some only once off, but you know, this could also very well be lab error or sampling error or something like that, and you don't want to have here a negative result just based off of one fluctuation like that, when in general it's not. So that you see, this is a way that you can build in flexibility for cases when the chemical constituents fluctuate, but without these permanent exceedances. And also take into account that in the undesirable results, you definitely want to build into that definition the fact that about the naturally occurring exceedances that are happening already, that those are not undesirable. So you would need to have that. It's not, in this case, your definition of undesirable result is going to rely heavily on minimum thresholds, but you're also going to have to say where it's naturally occurring exceedances, this is not considered undesirable. And if you looked at the mid-county GSP, that's how we handled it there as well, the same way. Other basins, I think, have also done similar things. Dave.
Yep. Okay. So that was a lot for you all to sort of be getting your arms around. Pausing here. We can go back up to the top if folks need. Opening the floor for comments. Again, these concepts of less flexible, more protective, or the alternative. And, you know, as I said a little bit earlier, and we'll certainly see this under groundwater levels as well, this is that example of where it is the values of you as a board There, as Georgina pointed out, there while there may not be anybody that is setting things on the extremes on either end, at the end of the day, the state is not going to tell you thou shalt do such and such or so and so. They're going to look at the defensibility of your data and the basis for your decisions to make sure those decisions are defensible. But where you fall on this spectrum of less or more protective or less or more flexible is a value judgment reflecting who you wish to be as an agency. So with that as a reminder, questions, comments? Let's go to Lois.
My mic. Hi. I like example 2. I think we need to be more flexible, that we can't just have such a limited line that we have to meet. I think it gets too complicated if we aren't flexible. That's all I wanted to say.
Hey, sorry, I had myself muted. Thank you very much, Lois. Let's go to Chris, and then to go to Jack.
I agree with Lois, and I like the concept of time as one of the metrics, because I think patterns and trends are what is most important for these things, not just occurrences.
Okay, thank you. Jack?
Yes, I agree with both Lois and Chris, and I like the concept, the tool of moving averages, which smooths out some of the bumps that might happen and should put us in good stead. So that's where I'm at.
Very good. Let's go to Dale Pollock.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in and say that I'm in favor of example 2, more flexible. I know that sampling errors and lab errors can happen, so I think that's good, and I like the moving average idea as well.
Does anybody feel so that's a good solid set of comments from a number of people in favor of that example too? Thank you, folks. Is there anybody that feels otherwise? You know, this is where again we have to sort of test these things out. So I know that we can sort of fall into silence as affirmation, but to test this out, I just want to be sure. Does anybody feel differently than what was expressed by your board colleagues there? Now would be a really excellent time. Again, there's no right or wrong, but does anybody feel different? Okay, are there any other comments at this stage or questions? Okay, Georgina, let's proceed.
Dave, real quick
Excellent.
here.
Oh, wait, hold on. Yeah, Nick?
Yeah, just as an admin note here, did that include the public? Because if so, I need to unmute the folks who are calling in.
No, I wasn't posing it to the public yet. I'm posing it to the board members. We'll open up the floor for the public in a little bit, but because this isn't an action, I'm not yet opening things up to the public.
All right, just wanted to make sure. Thank
you. Okay.
I think Nick was one ahead of you, Dave, because this is the next slide here.
Right. Okay. So go ahead,
Hold
Georgina.
on. Oh, yeah. No, go ahead.
Well, no, I just didn't know if there was any last final comments that you had to make before I open the floor one more time.
Oh, I see. I don't think so. I think that, you know, we've got great feedback so far on this one, undesirable. So I'm happy about that. And I think that the next slide here, we're going to really awesome not follow on, but try and finalize what people think about minimum thresholds and measurable objectives, the approach that we're planning to take here.
Okay, very good. So I want to check in one last time for that entire presentation. That was a lot, but you all did great. We still have time now to go on to the groundwater elevations, which we were hoping would be the case. So any last comments from the board, and then I'm going to open up the floor for public comment. So any comments by board members on anything that we've covered thus far? Okay, hearing none and seeing none, let's go ahead and Nick, please do now go ahead and open up the meeting, and let's get any comments from members of the public, please, as well as any members of the public that might be online.
All right, for those who are calling in via telephone, you are unmuted if you wish to speak at this time.
All right, anybody on the phone, members of the public, would like to speak to anything that's been covered thus far? Okay, hearing none, let's go ahead and close out public comment. Thank you very much, Nick. Thank you very much to the board. Georgina, let's proceed, please. Now, I will say that we are aiming to be completed with tonight's presentation at around 10 after 8 or thereabouts. That is going to allow us, we hope, to close out any final items and be done with the meeting tonight at 8:30, as we've committed to. As we proceed into this next section, we're going to be keeping an eye closely on time between myself, Nick, Georgina, and Director Perry. And at some point, if we feel like we're pushing up against that time limit, we will have to pause, basically stop, and then defer any further conversation on the groundwater elevation topic to your next meeting. We're not going to just try to muscle through like we did at the last meeting. So I just want everybody to be aware of that at the upfront, that should we get there and not be done, we will absolutely just move things on to the next meeting. So that's just a framing for everybody. With that, Georgina, go ahead.
Okay, so I've talked to you about our approach for minimum thresholds of using drinking water standards, except for nitrate, and any other constituents that we may add. We would also likewise use the drinking water standard, secondary or primary, whatever is applicable. And then with measurable objectives, using that the last 10-year average, or making sure at least we have three data points in our averaging. And so that's what we want. I want to know that you are all happy with that approach, so that we can move on from this and start devising the undesirable results, because we have to start hearing comments from you all saying you liked example 2. That gives me some direction to go, and I need to have this information on minimum thresholds and measurable objectives to be able to try and close that out and to bring that to you in one of the upcoming meetings. So I think that Dave, this is where I'll hand it back to you.
Do we need a motion of some kind and some sort of a vote from the board? Dave?
I don't believe that we do. We had not planned to take an actual formal action here, unless I'm forgetting something, Georgina. No?
Okay, that's fine.
We need to say, Dave, this is Pirat. We need the same you did with the first action, accepting the draft statement. This is accepting the proposed methodology. So it could be, unless there's any objections.
Okay. Well, yeah. Okay. So let's, Georgina, let's go back. I think it's a slide much earlier with the bullets, right? With the defining the methodology.
No, so I mean, this one, it's are there any objections to accept the proposed methodology for setting minimum thresholds based on state drinking water standards, except nitrate, and measurable objectives? Yeah.
That's the slide I'm talking about. We have a slide much earlier, didn't we?
I don't have a slide that says that. It's in the agenda.
All right. Okay. Never mind. All right. So let's just then proceed. Georgina, I'd like you to go ahead and state the exact wording of the methodology, then, please, because then we'll have to call a question based upon as everybody approves it, not an opposition. So let's go ahead and have you state that again, please.
Real quick, could I maybe get the presenter controls back? I could put it up on the big screen for everybody to see as well.
Yes, please.
Yes, and then Dave, you can read it because it's right there.
Great.
And just give me 1 second here, folks. I got to dig it up. All right, this is the agenda report for this item here, and I believe that the recommendation is going to be either item 3 or item 4. Am I correct in that?
No, it's on item 2.
No, it's item 2. It's item 2.
Gotcha.
All right, so the statement, I'm going to go ahead and read, thank you for highlighting that, but I'm going to go ahead and read it for the record. Except the action will be that the board approves accepting the proposed methodology for setting minimum thresholds and measurable objectives as preliminary sustainable management criteria for degraded groundwater quality. So the board approves accepting the proposed methodology for setting minimum thresholds and measurable objectives as preliminary sustainable management criteria for degraded groundwater quality. We had not received any public comments. I will check in one last time because we had a little bit of confusion here. So is there any further public comment or any public comment at all? Nick, if you could please go ahead and unmute for just one brief moment, perhaps.
All right, if you are calling into this event on a telephone, for those on telephone, you have been unmuted. If you wish to speak at this time, this is your opportunity.
Okay, hearing none, seeing none, let's go ahead and close that out. Chris, as director, I will look to you to go ahead and direct for a voice vote.
Okay, Dory, obviously a voice vote on what, I don't think we need a motion. Okay, so a motion on what was just read to us. Do I have one? Okay, Eden has just moved, so do I have a second?
Ruth seconds.
Ruth seconds. So we have Eden is a first, Ruth is a second, and a roll call vote when you can, Nick.
All right, just to clarify, Director Engfer, I just want to verify that you have no communications here.
I'm here.
Okay, gotcha. All right.
Aye.
Okay, so let's go ahead and do the roll call vote here. I have Cassidy and Stiles as the motioning and seconded, and as roll call vote, Director Engfer, your vote, please.
Yes.
Director Leopold. Oh, he's not here. My apologies. Director McPherson.
Aye.
Director Cassidy.
Yes.
Director Franklin.
Yes.
Director Pollock.
Yes.
Director Dillis.
Aye.
Director Ferris.
Abstain.
Director Henry. Director Henry, I think you may be muted.
Thank you. Yes.
Director Stiles.
Aye.
Director Perry.
Aye.
And just to verify, J.M. Brown is still not in the audience, and I believe that is the case. If you are, sir, if you could let me know, just because you are the alternate for Director Leopold. Okay, and hearing no response to that query, I have nine votes in favor.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody, for taking that action. Georgina, I'll hand it back over to you, and Nick obviously will need to hand control back over to Georgina.
One moment. Georgina, you are up.
You're muted, Georgina.
Thank you. I said a whole lot too. So we're going on to chronic lowering of groundwater levels. It is going to be technical again, but there's no actions here to be voted on. I just want to get general feeling from you of how to proceed, because here it's the first time we're kind of getting into this. It's not like groundwater quality where we'd already visited that a few times. So here we are going into the statement, draft statement that we have at the moment. This is the first statement that we've come up with for significant and unreasonable chronic lowering of groundwater levels. And it is groundwater levels declining below measured historical low levels that impair groundwater supply availability or cause undue financial burden for any of the basin's beneficial users or users. And we have not taken into account groundwater dependent ecosystems yet. And so we expect this will probably change. I mean, it's going to change tonight after we discuss it, but it needs to also have that component added to it once we have more information on that. And remember, it's supposed to be a very general statement. We kind of went through this already at the beginning of the water quality. Dave. You're muted, I think.
No, sorry, I am. Okay. Okay, so again, same as the last time, except we're not taking an action. Want everybody to take a close look at this and see if there is feedback that folks have or comments that folks have about how this is worded. We are obviously moving ourselves towards the same action ultimately, not tonight, but ultimately that we did tonight on the groundwater quality. So this is where we do start to take an opportunity to do some wordsmithing and weighing in. So, and of course we can defer further activities to a smaller group of folks. Let's go to Ruth and then to Doug.
I'd like to add a modifier, like I think we used the word significant or something of that sort in the last one, that significantly impair groundwater supply availability.
As we are doing this, Georgina, are you comfortable going into a mode where you can modify just as you had done the last time so we can start seeing some adjustments real time?
Oh, I don't think we'll do that. We'll do as we did before, where staff are taking notes and then we'll come back. We just want to take comments at this point, I think.
All right. Okay. All right, Doug, go ahead.
Yeah, two comments, and noting that I'm putting my blue pencil aside. As we did with quality, I think there needs to be some consideration of surface water as well as groundwater beneficial users. We made that explicit before. It probably should be here somehow. The other one for you all to think about is the implied and that is between declining below measured historic levels that impair groundwater supply. It's conceivable to me that we could impair groundwater supply without necessarily going below historic levels. I don't want to try to litigate that tonight. I suggest it's something you take back, think about, and then we could discuss in the future if you think it merits.
Okay, let me go to Chris, and then I actually want to come back to the point that Doug made and see if there's any response from staff that they may want to. I'm not saying they should, but I just want to see if any staff members have got any response to what Doug just said. But let's go to Chris first.
Just quickly on what Doug said, I think in terms of surface water, that note at the bottom, it's going to change the statement when groundwater dependent ecosystems are included. I think that's what that means. So that's one thing.
Surface water beneficial users may be different than GDEs.
That's true. Good point. Okay, and then I just wanted to ask a question. The cause undue financial burden for any of the basin's beneficial users section, just posing a question. So does that mean that we get to be off the hook and can have declining groundwater levels below historic measured levels that impair groundwater supply if we feel it's too expensive to fix it. You know what I mean? It seems like those are in opposition. So you could say, well, yeah, we're all messed up here, but it's going to cost too much money to fix it. So what the heck? Does that make
so that's
sense?
similar to what Jack said. Jack kind of said the same thing, right, about water quality.
Right. I mean, well, yeah, I'm just saying, I don't know if causing undue financial burden is a significant, I mean, you can't avoid the financial burden if you've got groundwater levels that are too low. You can't say that, well, that's a burden too, so we can't do anything about it. Seems.
Let's go to Jack.
Yeah, and yeah, that was my point. But another way to look at this is that it may also say if you have more than one way to address the issue and one is less expensive, and then that might be the way to go. It's adding the element for consideration. And it's hard to know, where to draw that line. What is, and I recognize I'm getting more comfortable with the word undo, by the way. So to me, it's something to look at. But I guess my question is, are we boxing ourselves in that way, or are we putting ourselves in a box, or can we just accept is a certain amount of significant and unreasonable? Can we live with that? Will the state accept that if we say, you know what if we do go to meet the minimum groundwater level, but we spend more money than we want to, so we're uncomfortable with that. But I think money is an important part of this. I'm glad it's in there, but I'm wondering if we are putting ourselves in a box.
Yeah, so just to clear up, Jack, there, the state isn't going to say that your statement's wrong. They can't do that. It's up to you to just the GSA decides that and what's sustainable for itself. So there's no wrong or right answer.
And it is probably important to recall that, and as we will be getting to in this section, time permitting, that this is an initial statement of something that's significant and reasonable. That financial burden factor has a lot to do then ultimately with where you set the MT and the MO and what the financial implications thereof are. So let's go to Lois.
The word undo to me that means to cause an unnecessary financial burden. To me, that's what the word undo means.
Okay. That might be kind of hard, Lois.
Wait, let's let Lois finish, and then whoever that was responding, go ahead. But Lois, please finish your comment.
Okay. You didn't hear my comment?
No, I did. It's just that right at the very tail end, somebody stepped on you, so I wanted to make sure that you could be heard completely. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say that, to me, cause undue financial burden means cause unnecessary financial burden. And the last thing we want to do is spend money we don't need to. I'm done.
Okay, thank you. Now, somebody was weighing in on that comment. I'm not sure who that was, but please feel free. Go ahead now.
It was me, and I agree with Lois, and maybe that's a better word to use than undo.
Okay.
Unnecessary. That's more descriptive.
Okay. And just as a note, obviously you've taken an action already on the water quality item, but since the term undo is used there, perhaps in a subsequent revisiting of that, you may make a similar choice. Are there any other comments at this time? Again, this is going to be up for discussion and revision for a bit of time after tonight. But any final comments on this right now? Okay, Chris,
Dave, just hold on a second.
wait, hold on, Georgina, please. Chris, your comment just then, was that in response to Lois, or was there an additional comment, Chris, that you had?
No, that was it.
Okay, go ahead, Georgina.
Sorry. We also want to give you the opportunity, like we did with the other, to send in an email comment after this meeting if you have one on this, because that does help us when we are redrafting.
So let's talk about timelines on that regard. Georgina, when would you like to be getting feedback from, or what would be the end date of when we would want to be getting feedback from the board?
Correct. Did we give them 2 weeks or so last time? Do you remember?
Last time we gave them 2 weeks. It is a little scrambling because people tend to submit them at the last day, and depending on the number of comments, informing you and shifting through all of them, it's a little tight. So maybe 10 days. So I'm looking at June 10th, possibly.
Anybody opposed to that, to June 10th? You would be providing written comments and suggestions on this to the attention of Nick and to Perrette. I believe that's how we did it last time.
Correct.
So anybody opposed to using June 10th?
Yes.
All right. All right, seeing no opposition, then we will identify that as an action item. Board members will provide comments, if so desired, on this draft statement in writing by no later than the end of the day on June 10th, let's say 5 p.m. on June 10th, and those will be to Nick Wallace and to Perrette. Okay, let's proceed, please.
Okay, so like we did with groundwater quality, we have considerations, things that we're thinking about when we're setting the groundwater level metrics. Some of these were discussed at the last board meeting and also provided in comments, which is which was very useful after the April board meeting. And we use those all to come up with this, used to guide development of this list that you see. And one is that people said that groundwater levels should not be allowed to get worse than they have been historically. We want to protect against dewatering of the Santa Margarita aquifer, protect groundwater dependent ecosystems, build in wording to indicate something about maximum rate of decline over time, that acknowledge that levels in some part of the basin may need to increase relative to recent conditions. So, you know, where there's been the large declines, that needs to be recovered where it can be. Then we need to develop these metrics for each aquifer, and also if measurable objectives are set to increase levels, these must consider cost. Okay. So these are all things we got from numerous directors. We got good input. And so this is what I summarized from that.
So are there any other considerations at this time that board members would like to provide? Anything that you feel is not reflected here? Okay, hearing none, let's proceed, please.
Okay, so the next slide, I apologize for in advance. It is a nasty statistical slide. And but what we're trying to do when we set minimum thresholds, I'm trying to give you a number of options. And there's no right answer to where you set your minimum threshold, really. And like I said, it's no one's judging you, say that's the wrong answer. It's up to you as a board to decide where you're comfortable with. And so I am trying to provide some methods that are statistical because we can repeat them. Anyone could repeat them and get the same answer. It's not objective. It's very subjective. Yeah. And so we're looking at trying to find a standardized method. So we looked at 3 options. The first in the blue is 2 times standard deviation of the average level. Now, a standard deviation is really a measure of how far from the average do the data stray? You know, how are they spread out from the average? So 2 times the standard deviation would be about 95% of the data would be covered in the, would be included in that 2 times standard deviation. Anything beyond that is kind of wacky. It's out there. It's kind of extreme. And then we have the minimum level of the period of that representative well. You look at the minimum groundwater level, and that's not a statistic. That fortunately is easy to understand. And then we get the other one, which would be something lower than the minimum level, because it's 1 times the standard deviation of the minimum level. So like the standard deviations are represented in this bell curve if everything was normally distributed, all your data, which is really the case, but it's kind of just pictorial here for you. Each of these is this is 2, the big arrow that you see is 2 times standard deviation. So and it's on either side, and so if you add up all these, the dark blue and the light blue, that's about 95% of the water levels would fall into there, and the 2 times the standard deviation would be a number. This is 1 standard deviation would be half of that, obviously. And so when we're saying 1 times the standard deviation of the minimum level, is that we would start at the minimum level, and it provides for water levels to fall below the historical minimum level by a depth equal to the deviation from the average. How different you are from the average that about 68% of levels experience. So that's all the dark blue that you see in that curve. Anything that falls in that, how the spread that they have from the average being the middle of that is what you would apply. This is all very complicated. I totally agree. And so it's better when I can show you on a chart what that looks like. But these are just, the reason why we're taking these is that they're statistically reproducible. Like I said, anyone could do it. And they've actually been used in other basins as well, have used similar methods to this. So although I don't expect everyone to understand that, I am going to pause here and just see if there are any questions on this. And like I said, some of your answers may be answered in the slides that come with you actually see with what this means when you plot it on a chart.
Right. So let's, as Georgina said, we're going to see this in applied terms in subsequent slides. But if there are any overarching questions, let's go ahead and pose them now. I also do want to do a time check. We are at 7:48 by my clock. Again, we're going to be aiming to end this portion of tonight's meeting at 10 after 8. So just be aware as we're moving along that we very, very likely may be hitting a pause point. Any questions? I don't see any. So Georgina, let's go ahead, please.
Okay. So some considerations. Do you take the high level? Do you take the low level? So in this chart here, a little logo kind of thing, you have 2 levels. Which one? And there are 2 minimum thresholds. Which one do you use? So let me tell you, if you take the lower one, it'll be easier to remain above that, right? So that's great. Things are easier, but it would be less protective if you were allowed to let levels go down to that low. The higher level, the green line, might be more difficult to remain above, but it is more protective. But I think you probably realize that that you need to take into account undesirable results. And so that will help you if you...
Georgina, I'm sorry, I want to pause you for just 1 minute because I just want to check on something. On my end, you broke up a little bit when you were going through that last slide, but that may be a connectivity on my end. Okay. Nick, were you experiencing the same thing just by proxy?
I recommend that this slide be repeated. I got a little bit of interference there as well.
All right. So Georgina, go ahead. Just repeat this quickly, please.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'll do it quick. So if you chose the lower level minimum threshold, what it means is that it would be easier to remain, if your level's already above it, hopefully easier to keep your remain above those levels. And it would though be less protective because it would allow you the opportunity to go down below your minimum that you've had in the past. A higher level, say that is in the area of where it's kind of higher than what your minimum level is, and it will be more difficult to achieve that unless you have some projects and management actions that you know is going to really push it up there. But it is much more protective if you have a level. So now what do how do you decide? And in deciding, you can't just decide just based off the data. I think you will have guessed that you can use undesirable results to provide you flexibility to not be unsustainable. So again, reminding you, undesirable result is a combination of minimum threshold exceedances that cause significant and unreasonable effects. And so the next slide here is going to show you the same thing that we've seen before on the groundwater quality. So this is how you can build in some flexibility. You say a certain percentage or a certain percentage of time you can exceed them, or it's a certain rate of decline that can't be exceeded. So that's how we have to think about those when we're deciding which minimum threshold should we choose. And I think I can go on to the next one. We're going to pause after this. So this is an example. If you chose the lower minimum threshold, you could say something like, and you were pretty sure that you weren't going to go below that, you could say no representative monitoring point can have its groundwater level fall below its minimum threshold. In mid-county, we had a level that was a bit lower than the past, about 20 to 30 feet lower than historic lows. And we said that the monthly average level could not go below that at any point. So we built a little bit of flexibility by using the monthly average. And so that was one example. And another would be other basins have used a certain percentage can exceed the minimum thresholds. So that would be an example of using the lower one. And I am going to go on to the next one. It's describing the minimum threshold, if you chose a higher one, what that might look like. And that one would be that levels are, or the groundwater levels are unsustainable if the levels fall below its minimum threshold, so the green line, say for more than a certain amount of time at an average rate of something. And I just put example numbers in here, it doesn't mean anything really, but that's how you can accommodate flexibility. So I think that we want to hear from you what you're most comfortable with, a higher level, a lower level, and I think we already heard on the water quality that you like the flexibility. I'm hedging that you're going to say the same thing here, but I do want to hear any comments that you have.
Okay, so let's dive in, same process. I think one thing that would also be very helpful is as you're identifying or making comments as to which you prefer, to the extent you're comfortable, express why, not because we want to challenge the why, but I think having people understand why you're saying you prefer one or the other starts, again, reflecting not only just a specific answer, but also where your values are. Because like I've said a couple times tonight, these kinds of decisions start to represent the values of the agency and the values of you all as individual members of the agency. So, perspectives. Where do you lean towards? The more of a lower type or an upper example? Georgina, can you go back a couple of slides, please, to, I think it's like 2 slides back. One more, please.
This one?
No, I thought maybe it was the one. Never mind. I thought there was.
I can just do this one.
All right. Okay, comments, anybody? Okay, Chris, go ahead, please. Chris Perry. Yeah, that's the one I wanted.
Yeah, what I recall us talking about in the past was we would have a minimum threshold, but we would also have an aspirational threshold that it's something we wanted to achieve. And the minimum threshold would be more based on the timestamp that we were given by the Act, which was, I believe, 2013. Or sort of what we were talking about is historic levels past 10 years. We don't want to fall below that, but we had an aspirational goal of increasing that amount. So we wanted to let it be known that we had a value, we placed a value on having a better result than we were actually required from a undesirable standpoint, minimum threshold.
And that's correct. And that's memorialized in a manner of speaking in your guiding principles.
Correct.
The year is 2015, by the way, not 2013. But again, that sentiment is expressed in your guiding principles. All right. Other thoughts? I do not see any coming up. I know this is a lot. I know it's getting late in the day. We're going to keep running into that kind of a challenge for many meetings to come, frankly. Let's go to Doug.
Yeah, so again, like Chris, mindful that we have aspirational goals that may be reflected in our minimum thresholds, will certainly be reflected in our management objectives, motivated by a desire to be able to accommodate water supply augmentation strategies that might include aquifer storage and recovery. Whatever minimum, if we set a high minimum threshold, that is one that's somewhat more aspirational rather than just a layup, then I'm going to be increasingly interested in that, in the exceedance language, allowing for occasional exceedances of that minimum threshold, as long as recovery happens in a timely way, and even perhaps it's in the context of drought mitigation, sort of consistent with the state guidelines. To the extent we set a layup goal down low, that becomes less of an issue. But I wanted to be sure that was out there.
Mm-hmm. Let me pose a question. To all of y'all as board members. As with the slide that is up here, a lower minimum threshold level will be easier to remain above. Is there given the long-standing sentiments in this basin and frankly some of the disagreements and conflicts, can a lower minimum threshold level that is easier to stay above, which is essentially a level of acceptance of a certain condition, is that politically viable? Does anybody want to speak to that? Okay. I do not see any other comments to be made. So Georgina, unless there's anything else you want me to try to poke and prod about, I'd say let's proceed.
Okay, I'll be able to answer some of those comments coming up here. Let's see, we went through this, the two examples. So now when we come to the approach for setting measurable objectives, this is the aspirational goal. This is where that comes into. Remember, we got to try and separate these two, although I do acknowledge that Chris is talking a little bit about having a slightly higher minimum threshold, maybe to make sure that we are recovering the basin. Just remember, so we have 20 years to make sure that we are avoiding this minimum threshold the whole time. And saying the 20 years that go between when we submit the GSP to 20 years, 2042, we have to prove that we're above, and we have to remain above that threshold, or avoid the undesirable results associated with that threshold for 50 years into the future. Now, if we find that we're way above that minimum threshold that we set, we can actually raise that at any point. Like I've told you multiple times, you can change these metrics at any point. If you get more data, if basin conditions change a lot, that we got some other source of water that we can put in the basin and things change, you probably want to then lift up your measurable minimum thresholds, because you don't want to go back to the old days. So just something to bear in mind. Okay, so this slide here is talking about approaches for setting measurable objectives. If we want to maintain levels, I recommend using here average levels. And if we want to recover levels, I don't have a statistical method to say this is the number that we should use. We're going to have to use the groundwater model to select achievable levels, given because the model is going to take into account the projects and management actions, climate change, changes in pumping, all these things that I can't build into a hydrograph. So that's, you'll see that I recommend in areas where we want to recover levels, I don't actually give a measurable objective, because I don't know what that is. We know it's something higher than where it is now, but how high is based off what projects and management actions are we going to do, and and that is also indirectly or directly related to the cost, right? So and any of these levels that we choose for measurable objectives, again, have to be achievable. They can't be so aspirational that we never get there. You do want to be striving towards something. So what's nice with the groundwater model is that you can simulate what groundwater levels would be like in a well sometime into the future, given all these changes that you assume changes that are going to happen. And we can see then how high the groundwater levels rise in response to these things. And so then we will have a fairly good idea of where the measurable objective could be based off the modeling data that we have. And so that's what I recommend for setting those measurable objectives.
So Georgina, we're at about 8 minutes out. I'm wondering whether you think you can get through, just as a introductory level, the next 3 or so slides, which are just laying out the approach on a per aquifer basis, and I think that's when we're going to have to cap it off.
Yes, I think there was the spiral diagram where I said we would stop at, and that's where we're going to stop at. Okay?
I don't think we're going to get there, but okay, give it a shot.
I think these might go fairly quickly. Hopefully,
Right.
yeah. So next I have a series of slides, and it's for each aquifer. And I'm saying in certain parts of the basin, we want to recover groundwater levels, and in others where there hasn't been a downward trend, we are going to maintain. And I just wanted to see if you agree with my objectives. These are kind of general objectives for the different areas. So this is Santa Margarita. In the area of and Pasión Tempo and Camp Evers, where the Santa Margarita is dewatered, we would like it to not be dewatered. We want to recover groundwater levels there, and so we would use the groundwater model. And then in the Quail Hollow, Olympia, and any other areas, we don't really have data in any other areas, but if we did, for now, we would say we would want to maintain levels. And I've included the hydrograph for Quail Olympia, I think, no, Quail Hollow. And just to show you, there is no long-term decline there. And so that's why I'm saying maintain. So we'll pause quickly here and see if anyone has anything else they want to add to this, if they don't agree with what I've set for these little mini objectives.
Any immediate thoughts? Okay, let's proceed.
Next is the Monterey Formation. And we talked about this before, that it's not really a relied on aquifer. It's not used by any of the municipal suppliers. They're in the middle of the basin, up in the northern parts, that's all they have. You remember Lewis's story of Lompico, where they had their 3 Monterey wells. It's not really used. We would not target and say, you see the hydrograph there on the side, that yes, there's been a decline, but if we address the Santa Margarita and the Lompico and recover levels there, We will also be recovering levels here in the Monterey, but still, so we say recover, but I don't think there'll be a project that would specifically target the Monterey. So we'd use the model for that. And then anywhere else we had data, we don't have any long-term groundwater level data. We would want to maintain levels elsewhere. That's
Okay,
what I'm saying for Monterey.
Let's go to Jack. Jack, go ahead.
Yes, thanks. I just recover, I guess that could mean recover sounds like it means go back 100%, but we could do something less, right? We could say something like recover 50% of the difference between where it's been and where we want to go, where it might otherwise.
And in all of, and in all of these, I'm not saying how much recovery, I'm just saying it's going to be up from where it is now. Okay. I'm not saying how much. That's why we need the water model to say how much could it go up, because I can't tell you that without knowing what's, other sources of water. How are we going to achieve that?
Okay, thank you. Let's proceed.
So Lompico Aquifer, very clearly we want to recover there in that Scotts Valley area where it's just there. It's locally it's declined like this, and again we'd use the groundwater models. Anywhere else that hasn't seen this big decline, we'd want to maintain levels. Okay, and here again the recovery, I don't know how much of it, but we want to be able to recover something for according to what's financially feasible.
Okay, we're getting a little bit of breakup from you again, Georgina. Responses or reactions to what Georgina had. Wait, don't go ahead yet, please. To what Georgina just showed. Any comments from folks? Okay, let's proceed, please.
Okay, last one is Butano. That one we don't have terribly great information, and for now we would maintain the hydrographs that we do have for the pumping wells are a mix of Lompico and Butano, and it's just also very localized. I don't think we have the data to be able to say we would recover that area. So I'm recommending that we would maintain levels where they are now.
Okay, thoughts, comments from anyone? Okay, let's proceed.
And this is where we're going to stop, Dave, or do you want me to continue?
No, I think we're going to really need to cap it off here. I think if there's any sort of closing comments you want to say, as well as setting the stage for the next work, I would certainly say that people should probably take advantage of the slides that had been sent out. They're pretty intense. We're going to want to continue the office hours model so people can be familiarizing themselves very much with the next slides. But why don't you go ahead and close this out, Georgina?
Okay, right. Well, this slide is just saying that, reminding you that it's an iterative process of doing these management criteria. So, and that we are going to have to use the model, go back and have a look and see how things are. There's no right answer here, and so don't feel intimidated that you have to get the answer right away. And this is really going to lead you into the next set of slides, which hopefully you get a chance to look at and read the notes on, that are showing you that we have representative monitoring wells for groundwater levels, and that we have these 3 different options. I told you the different standard deviations, and then a measurable objective if it's in an area where we're maintaining levels. And that's what we were going to go into next, but we'll hold that off for next meeting.
Let's go to Paret with a question.
I was wondering if this section is also offered up for directors to submit comments to staff.
I wouldn't see why not. So I think you mean particularly, you mean the prior slides, which was laying out the proposed approach?
Correct, yes, because we did get input for the statement of significant and unreasonable groundwater levels, and we invited more input on that. And then the last one here is the approach for minimum thresholds and management measurable objectives. So we would also, and we did not receive a whole lot. So would it be helpful for you, Georgina, if directors submitted their additional input to staff?
Yeah, I think that their understanding of those proposed methods would take great benefit from looking at the hydrographs that come after this slide. So I would say hold off until we do cover that, because then it all makes a lot more sense when you see the stuff plotted out.
Okay.
Okay, with that, any final questions or comments from board members? Seeing none, any final questions or comments from the public? Nick, if you want to go ahead and unmute the public.
Absolutely. One moment, please. All right, if you are a member of the public calling in on a telephone, you have been unmuted, and this is your opportunity to comment.
Any comments or questions to what's been laid out this evening?
All right, hearing none, I am going to go ahead and remute to proceed.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Georgina. Thank you, Dave. That was very well done and pretty expeditious. Okay, as far as staff reports, we're going to present them quarterly as it says. Same thing with directors' reports. Future items look pretty straightforward. Anyone have any questions on future items?
I have a really quick comment. The quarterly, that is also to hopefully aid in this process of not dragging those minutes too long. The budget is going to be exception. Otherwise, we will stick with January, April, July, and October being the 4 meetings throughout the year, that we will have more administrative type items included in agenda, but the budget needs to be approved before the start of the fiscal year. So next board meeting, that will be an action item in addition to the GSB elements.
Okay, great. Thank you. Informational items, you've seen that. Calendar events, lot of virtual conferences coming up. It'd be very interesting to see how this all goes. Could be great. Anyone have anything on any of those 2 items, informational or events? Any staff comment? No? Hearing none?
Just if anybody's interested, please get in touch with Nick Wallace, and he can assist in getting you registered.
Yes, recommend all of them. All very good. Water reuse is especially educational if you're concerned about the implications of ground recharge using recycled water. Okay, that takes us amazingly ahead of schedule by 17 minutes to number 10. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
Ruth, right on his heels. We have Cassidy and Stiles, first and second. Nick? You need a roll call vote?
Yep, let's go ahead and just knock out a quick roll call all. Apologies. Move a little quick for me. Let me just bring up the paper. All right, Director Engfer.
Aye.
Director Leopold is not here. Director Brown, are you in the audience? I don't believe so, but I'm not hearing him. Director McPherson.
Aye.
Director Cassidy.
Aye.
Director Franklin.
Aye.
Director Pollock.
Aye.
Director Dillis.
Aye.
Director Ferris.
Aye.
Director Henry. Director Henry, if you could check your mute button.
Aye.
Gotcha. And Director Stiles.
Aye.
And Director Perry.
Aye.
All right, that's 10 for 11.
Okay. Hey, great job. Thank you, everybody, for hanging in there. And Looking forward to getting together in the future in person one of these days, but so far so good. Well done. Thank you.
Yep. Appreciate y'all coming out. As always, thanks for showing up, and we'll be seeing you.
Thank you, Nick. Good job.
Night all.
Good night.
Good night.